welcome to In Conversation. Those of us who have pets love them, don't we? But rarely do we come across people who are genuinely concerned about animal welfare and about the welfare of communities looking after them. Our guest today is Dr. Else Koller-Olofsson, a German veterinary doctor who has spent 30 years in India engaging with the Raika community in Rajasthan. The Raikas are nomads that raise camels and the livelihood revolves around them. Hers is a passionate voice calling for sustaining the animal cultures in India. Here's her story. Camels are the pride of Rajasthan. They are intrinsically linked to the cultural identity of the desert state. Camels are also the source of livelihood of the local Raika community that has been herding camels for centuries. The Raikas are renowned as the only camel breeders and herders in the world who have protected their camels from slaughter. Their knowledge about all aspects of the camel's behavior, breeding and health care is legendary. But camels and their Raika herders are now struggling to survive because of disappearing grazing lands, mechanized farming, disease and a declining demand for camels. Dr. Ilse Koller-Olofsson, a German veterinary doctor, vowed to change that 30 years ago. In 1990, she arrived in Rajasthan to study the Raika camel herders and has since then dedicated her life to camels and the camel herders of the state. Dr. Else recognized the need to protect the livelihood of Raikas and in turn their camels and set up Lokhit Pashu Palak Sansthan with a Rajasthani partner, Hanwant Singh, in Rajasthan in 1996. The organization has since been working for the welfare of camels and their herders. The organization also helps the Raikas by providing camel veterinary care using both traditional remedies and modern medicine. In 2010, Dr. Else and Hanwant Singh founded Camel Charisma, a social enterprise that develops and markets camel products like camel milk, camel wool, and camel dung. Camel Charisma is working to revive camel husbandry in Rajasthan and is creating income opportunities for the traditional camel herders. In 2017, the Government of India honoured Dr. Else for her engagement and research with the Raika pastoralist community by conferring upon her the Nari Shakti Award. In 2018, Dr. Else was awarded with the Federal Cross of Merit by the German federal government. Even after 3 decades, Dr. Else continues to work towards saving Rajasthan's animals and the Raika culture associated with them. Welcome, Dr. Olofsson, to Doordarshan.
Thank you so much, Moon. Pleasure to be here.
The pleasure is ours. You grew up in Germany in the midst of horses and all kinds of other animals, and then you studied veterinary medicine, you became a veterinary doctor, then you changed course for a brief while before you discovered your love for camels. How did it all happen?
Yeah, well, yes, I chose veterinary medicine because I loved animals. My whole childhood revolved around, taking care of animals. So becoming a veterinarian seemed to be like the logical thing to do. But when I studied and after I started practicing as a veterinarian, I actually realized if you deal with farm animals, it's a very commercial thing. And also at that time already there was a transition from traditional farming to industrial livestock keeping, and I just couldn't cope with that. I felt this is not the right thing for me to do. So I was lost. I looked for a different thing to do in my life to give it purpose, and I got interested in archaeology and started working in Jordan on an archaeological excavation, identifying animal bones and then making conclusions about previous economies and ecologies, etc. And around this lovely dig there was a beautiful camel herd coming every day to drink at a little wadi, and it was such a harmony between the herder and that camel herd that it touched me enormously, because the camel herder was singing to those camels. And it was just a beautiful scene, and the whole interaction of the herder with the camels. I just thought, this is it. And then camels, of course, they also, for, you know, being growing up in Germany, camels, they have some kind of touch of romance associated with them. And so I did my PhD actually on camel domestication. And then after some time, I got kind of bored just looking at the animal bones, you know, of dead animals. I thought I want to see real camels again. And so I applied for a fellowship to study camel socioeconomics in India 30 years ago. And that's when everything took its course.
So how did you start engaging with the Raikas, the traditional caretaker community of camels in Rajasthan?
You know, it was really difficult to even get in touch with them, to even meet them, because they're nomadic. You know, I spent months actually trying to track them down, and I couldn't. I could maybe visit them in a village or so, but I never saw the camels, only somewhere at the horizon, because I was working in Bikaner initially at the National Research Center on Camel. And then, fortunately, I met the first veterinarian from the Raika community, and he invited me to visit him in Sadri in Pali district of Rajasthan, where the camels are actually herded. You know, they're not roaming around on their own as they do in the desert, but they go out with their herder in the morning and come back at the evening. So it's that really close relationship between people and camels, where, you know, they kind of talk to each other, they communicate with each other. The camels listen to what the herder says, and the herder also understands what the camels want.
And there is a mythological perspective, right, that the Raikas have towards their camels.
Yes, exactly. So their belief is that they were actually created by Lord Shiva to take care of the first camel that Parvati had shaped out of clay, and into which Lord Shiva he put life into them, and then the camel caused a lot of trouble. And then Parvati, she asked him to please give me a man to take care of the camels, so it's not that much of a nuisance. So then he created, he rolled up something from his skin and sweat, and he created the first Raika. So because the Raika believe that they were created for the purpose of taking care of camels, so they have this sense of responsibility towards them, and this is what fascinated me. The camels are not pets, but they are perceived and treated as members of the family, and that's what that still fascinates me. Yeah.
It indeed is fascinating, and you're telling us so much about the bond that the community shares with the camels. In your book that you'd published in 2014 called The Camel Karma, you've spoken about the nutritional benefits of camel milk, and you've also written about how closing the forests to camel grazing had a lot of toll on the camels as well as the cattle herders. Tell us about both these aspects.
Yeah, so camel milk is actually, it's hyped the world over as a health product. It's different from cow's milk. It has lower fat content. It has vitamin C content 6 times that of cow's milk. It has iron content 10 times that of cow's milk. And it's also shown to be very good for diabetes patients. I mean, it's not a cure. I want to make that clear. Camel milk is not a cure, but it really helps. So if you regularly take camel milk, it helps you to lower your blood sugar. It can replace insulin to some extent. That's one thing. But the other really interesting angle is that it's good for many children that have been diagnosed with autism. And autism also, it's a spectrum of diseases. So I won't say that camel milk is a cure, but in some cases it can have a really dramatic effect. And we've heard stories from parents that the children, they make better eye contact, they sleep better, sometimes they even improve their verbal abilities. So camel milk, I think it's incredibly healthy. It also is used, cancer, we also have cancer patients actually sometimes staying with us to drink camel milk. And so we haven't done a medical studies, but it's all anecdotal on our side, but there are also scientific publications looking into these things. So camel milk is an incredible resource. We don't want to let it go. But unfortunately, the camel population in India is really going down. And for a long time, the main reason for that was actually the closure of grazing areas and the loss of grazing land. Very much to do with the forest, not allowing camels to graze in the forest during the monsoon. And that's the main complaint we've been hearing, for 30 years. Our camels can't go in the forest, or everywhere there's fencing. So the space is disappearing for camels to roam around.
But there are two points of view there. People like you believe that forests should be opened for livestock grazing, including camel grazing. There's the other point of view that is voiced by wildlife conservationists who believe that this could have a fallout and that it could impact other animals in the forests. Can a middle ground be found here?
Yeah, absolutely. I also don't believe in, in uncontrolled grazing or in throwing open the forest. It has to be managed, but it can be managed. Really, the closure of the forest in India, it's a relic from colonial times. We've always had livestock grazing in the forest in India. And then in the 19th century, when the foresters, it was actually a German forester, Dietrich Brandeis, who put in place of India's first Forest Act, trying to keep out all livestock, trying to shut up all the traditional uses of the forest. It's not just the livestock that was affected, but a lot of tribal people living in the forest, which is why then in 2006 India had the Forest Rights Act, which unfortunately is not being implemented, at least not for nomadic pastoralists. So this is the historical reason why the situation is like it is in India. But in other parts of the world, we have actually silvopastoralism. It is having trees and livestock together, and that is promoted as kind of the most advanced and the most ecologically friendly way of livestock keeping. So it's deeply ingrained ways of thinking that are in the way, I think, of finding the middle ground.
Taking forward from here, you said that in India, the camel population is declining. What's the trend globally? Also, what's the trend in India and globally with regard to livestock production systems?
Actually, globally, the camel population has doubled in the last 50 years. It is on a very steep upwards trajectory, especially in the Horn of Africa and also in parts of the Arabian Peninsula. India is basically the only country that is losing its camels. It's very unfortunate, and it's actually the law that was instituted in Rajasthan, I think a few years ago, I think 2016 or so, making the camel state animal, which is fine, but there's also an act which prohibits the export of camels from Rajasthan. And so at the moment, we don't have a purpose for the male camels. What do we do with them? And so all the traditional income sources, the camels used to be sold at Pushkar, and Pushkar for camels, it's unfortunately finished. It's very sad to say. So that's the camel situation. And now, yes, India, if we look at the livestock scenario in general, India is actually a model for other countries, I would say, because most of its livestock is kept in what we call agro-pastoral systems. The livestock is moving, it's integrated with crops, and India is the biggest exporter of sheep and goat. It's the biggest producer of dairy. It's the biggest producer of buffalo meat. So India is actually incredibly productive in terms of livestock, even though it's densely populated. And that is because it's so well, integrated with the crop cycle. And because we have all these pastoralists, we still have them, even in the remote areas, in Rajasthan, in the desert, in Gujarat, in the Himalayas. They are there, and they are producing, and they are the backbone of India's livestock economy.
You advocate a traditional approach to livestock production systems instead of an industrial approach. Why do you think that the traditional approach should be sustained?
Because it has all the benefits, really. I mean, it is good from the perspective of animal welfare because the animals are not cooped in, but they are moving. It is also good for biodiversity because animals can directly convert wild vegetation into a high level, into protein. And you don't need to go through that intermediary stage of growing crops to feed the livestock. If you grow crops, you eliminate the local biodiversity and you use fertilizer, chemicals, and all that. You use fossil fuels. Whereas if you have livestock, they don't need any of that. So it's a fantastic system, really, from all perspectives. I mean, and it's also equitable, because it provides opportunities for small farmers as well. In the rest of the world, or in many parts of the world, the livestock keeping is industrialized, and it's concentrated in the hands of a few very large farmers or corporations. So the other rural people totally lose out. So I'm really in favor of India, recognizing the treasure that it has in its traditional system. Traditional doesn't mean static, I mean, we can make use of new technologies, of mobile phones and many things, but the principles are sound. It's ecologically sound, the system as we have. Another important point is the manure. The camels and the sheep and the goat, they deposit the organic manure directly on the field. And if we lose that, India is dependent on imports of urea and other chemical fertilizers. If in India the livestock disappears from the picture, it's going to be a problem. Yeah.
You also say that India presents a model to the world.
Yeah.
What are the changes that you have noticed over the years with regard to the entire ecosystem around livestock and their keepers in India over the years?
It's getting much more difficult, for the nomadic livestock because the fences are everywhere. The forest has, the legal situation regarding grazing in the forest has become worse. Actually, when I first came here, the herders still had rights in a way. They paid a fee to graze their animals, and now they don't pay a fee, they pay a fine. So that has disappeared. But on the upside, we also have now a lot of young researchers in India which are working on these issues. So I have hope there may be some changes coming, but it's urgent. I mean, we need to do something fast to save India's traditional livestock keepers.
So let's come to some of those specific interventions. What do you suggest needs to be done to sustain what you call the animal cultures in India?
First, we need to recognize that they are there. And that isn't there because the animal scientists, they have been trained in the Western mold, kind of, in this efficiency model, in seeing animals as like input-output machines. Now, it's all about performance. Now, you put that much in, that much feed in, and then you get that much milk out. And that's the wrong thing, because if you apply that model, then from that perspective, industrial systems are most efficient. But then you forget all the other, the ecological angles if you do that. So the problem is that, the bureaucrats or the animal scientists, they think the Indian animals are not very productive. But it's actually the biomass, the vegetation, which is the key point, which has to be exploited optimally. If you have very efficient animals, then you need to end up that you have to import the feed for them from Brazil. And then for that, the rainforest has to be cut. So the only sustainable way is to utilize the vegetation that is available in the most effective way. And for that, you need livestock, that walks well and that's resilient and disease resistant and all these things, which you lose if you only go for high performance livestock.
You've also set up a social enterprise called Camel Charisma, through which you
Yes.
monetize camel products like camel milk and other products. Is monetization going to be instrumental in revival of the livelihoods of these livestock keepers and also help camels?
For I mean, monetization is, it sounds, I don't know if that's the right word, but I mean, the people need to be able to make a living from keeping camels, so they need to have some income. And at the moment, the milk is the only way, unfortunately. And it's part of the solution. It's a big part of the solution, but it's not everything. We also at the same time need to address the grazing issues. We need to find a purpose for the male camels. At the moment, you can't sell them basically, so they run wild, they become dangerous, and that's a very bad situation. And they run around, they have accidents with the railway or with cars, and it's very cruel also because the animals get neglected. They get diseases that can't be treated. So camels really, they need that, that caretaking by humans, but humans can only take care of them if they get something in return, if there's some monetization.
Absolutely.
I mean, nobody's going to keep them just for fun. I mean, these Reika are poor people usually. They have no land or anything, so they can't just do it for fun. The camel is a big asset for India or for any country. And when we look at climate change, temperatures are going up. Maybe water is becoming scarcer. The camel is the ecological solution for the future, and also it has a lot of benefits for public health. So we need to make use of that, and we can support everything. We can support the camels, we can support livelihoods, we can make use of the milk for anemic mothers, pregnant mothers would really benefit from drinking camel milk. So there's a lot of scope, but it needs some investment. We started Camel Charisma not because we want to do business, because nobody else was doing it. Somebody had to make a start, and now there are a lot of Reika who are also trying to sell milk, but it needs infrastructure and some support. Otherwise, it can't be done.
Right, it's a very pertinent issue that you have associated yourself with and you've dedicated your life to. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for listening. Thanks.